Hello, whispers in the dark viewers. In today's video, I will tell you our Behind the 13th Door story. You may feel scared while listening to this story. If you are ready for horror and mystery, let's start. Sarah stared up at the towering Victorian house, its once grand facade now crumbling and shrouded in a veil of mist. The letter clutched in her hands had summoned her here, informing her of her estranged grandfather's passing and the inheritance of this decaying estate. A mix of apprehension and curiosity swirled within her as she approached the imposing structure, its presence looming over the small, isolated town. Stepping through the rusted gates, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, as if the very atmosphere of the place was holding its breath. She quickened her pace, her boots crunching against the overgrown gravel path that led to the front door. "I can't believe he left this place to me," she murmured, her fingers tracing the intricate woodwork of the door. After years of estrangement, the idea of inheriting her grandfather's home was both a revelation and a burden. Sarah had so many unanswered questions about her family's past, and this crumbling Victorian held the key. With a deep breath, she pushed open the door, wincing as it creaked in protest. The interior was shrouded in shadows, the once grand entryway now coated in a thick layer of dust and neglect. Sarah stepped inside, her senses immediately assaulted by the musty, stale air and the overwhelming sense of abandonment. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing through the cavernous space. "Grandfather, are you here?" Silence was her only response, save for the faint sound of wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. Sarah moved forward, her fingers trailing along the ornate banister of the grand staircase that dominated the foyer. As she ascended, her eyes were drawn to the numerous doors that lined the upper hallway, each one a mystery waiting to be unraveled. 12 doors, she murmured, counting them carefully. But where's the 13th? A sudden movement in the corner of her eye caused her to freeze, her heart pounding in her chest. She whirled around, but the hallway was empty, save for the shadows that seemed to dance and shift with an unseen force. "Mark," she whispered, wishing her boyfriend had accompanied her on this journey. He had been adamant about her not coming to the house, his protective instincts kicking into overdrive. But Sarah's curiosity had won out, and now she found herself alone, surrounded by the ghosts of her family's past. Steeling her nerves, she continued her exploration, her fingers trailing along the worn wood of the doors. Each one was locked, save for the one at the far end of the hallway. Curiosity piqued. She turned the handle and pushed the door open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with old furniture and forgotten relics. Stepping inside, Sarah's gaze was drawn to a large, ornate desk in the corner. Dust-covered journals and letters were scattered across its surface, and she couldn't resist the urge to sift through them. Brushing away the grime, she carefully opened one of the journals, her eyes widening as she read the first few lines. "Grandfather," she breathed, her fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. The journal entries spoke of a troubled past, hinting at dark secrets and unimaginable horrors. As she delved deeper into the pages, a sense of unease began to settle in the pit of her stomach. "What happened here?" she whispered, her eyes scanning the words with a growing sense of dread. The more she read, the more she realized that her grandfather's life had been shrouded in a veil of darkness, a darkness that now threatened to consume her. A sudden creak from the hallway outside startled her, and she whirled around, her heart racing. The door remained open, but the shadows seemed to have grown deeper, more ominous. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, and she quickly closed the journal, her hands trembling. "Mark," she called out, her voice wavering. "Is that you?" No response. The silence was deafening, and Sarah found herself fighting the urge to flee. This place, her grandfather's legacy, was filled with an unseen presence, a malevolent force that seemed to seep into every corner. Steeling her nerves, she stepped out into the hallway, her gaze sweeping the area for any sign of movement. The 12 doors stood before her, each one a potential gateway to the unknown. Sarah's fingers traced the intricate carvings on the nearest door, her mind racing with questions and theories. "What are you hiding?" "Grandfather," she murmured, her determination to uncover the truth growing stronger with each passing moment. A sudden sound from the staircase caught her attention, and she whirled around, her heart pounding. A figure emerged from the shadows, and Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her as she recognized the familiar face. "Mark," she breathed, rushing towards him. "I'm so glad you're here." Mark's expression was a mix of concern and frustration as he reached out to grasp her shoulders. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice laced with worry. "I told you not to come to this place." Sarah felt a twinge of guilt, but her determination outweighed her boyfriend's warnings. "I had to, Mark," she said, her voice resolute. "There are so many unanswered questions, so many secrets that my grandfather took to the grave. I need to know what happened here." Mark's grip tightened, and he shook his head, his brow furrowed in concern. "This place is dangerous, Sarah," he warned. "There's something wrong about it. I can feel it in the air." Sarah met his gaze, her own eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "I have to try, Mark," she said softly. "I need to understand my family's past, no matter the cost." The two stood in silence for a moment, the tension palpable. Finally, Mark sighed, his shoulders slumping in resignation. "All right," he said, his voice resigned. "But I'm not leaving your side, Sarah. Not for a second." Sarah offered him a grateful smile, her heart swelling with appreciation for his unwavering support. Together, they turned their attention back to the hallway, the 12 doors looming before them, each one a tantalizing clue to the mysteries that lay within. The first few days in the house blurred together for Sarah. Each morning, she would find herself standing before the row of 12 doors, her hand hesitating over the ornate carvings, searching for a sign of the 13th. Mark's unease grew as he watched her pace the halls, her steps growing more frantic with each passing hour. "You haven't slept," he said one evening, his voice edged with frustration. "This house, it's getting to you." Sarah barely acknowledged him, her gaze fixed on the far end of the hallway. "I know it's here, Mark. There's something behind the 13th door. Something my grandfather didn't want anyone to find, or something no one should find," he muttered under his breath, following her gaze warily. That night, the first of many strange occurrences began. Sarah sat in the study, surrounded by the clutter of her grandfather's past. Faded letters, tattered journals, and brittle photographs were scattered across the desk, but nothing concrete emerged, just fragments of a life burdened by secrets. The light above her flickered, drawing her attention to the shadows pooling at the corners of the room. Then came the whispers, faint and disjointed, like voices carried on the wind. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mark looked up from the nearby armchair, where he had been keeping a vigilant watch. "Hear what?" Sarah turned toward him, the color drained from her face. "The whispers. Someone's here." Mark straightened, his hand instinctively reaching for the heavy flashlight he had carried since their arrival. "You're imagining things, Sarah. This house is playing tricks on you." But Sarah wasn't imagining anything. The whispers continued long into the night, growing louder and more insistent. They echoed through the halls, carrying fragmented words that seemed to burrow into her mind. Buried, forgotten 13. The next morning, Sarah stood before the hallway once more, exhaustion etched into her features. Mark, ever watchful, leaned against the banister, arms crossed tightly. "I need to find it," she said, more to herself than to him. "Find what?" Mark snapped, his patience fraying. "Sarah, you're chasing shadows. This house, it's doing something to you. You're not yourself anymore." But she couldn't stop. Something was calling her. It was as if the house itself had latched onto her mind, feeding her an insatiable need to uncover its secrets. That night, the whispers returned, louder than before, accompanied by fleeting glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision. And then she saw him. At first, she thought it was Mark standing at the edge of the hallway, but the figure was wrong, too tall, too thin. Its outline shimmered faintly, like smoke caught in the moonlight. Sarah froze, her breath hitching in her throat as the figure turned toward her. Its face was a blur, featureless save for two hollow, glowing eyes that seemed to bore into her soul. Sarah. It spoke her name, its voice layered with anguish and guilt. You shouldn't be here. She stumbled back, her voice caught in her throat. The figure took a step closer, and she could feel the air grow colder, heavier. Fragments of memories, not her own, flashed in her mind. Images of her grandfather standing before the 13th door, his face twisted with dread. The sound of distant screams, the sight of blood pooling on the wooden floorboards. What are you? She managed to choke out. The figure paused, its form wavering as if caught between existence and oblivion. A warning, it rasped. Leave, before it's too late. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. Sarah sank to her knees, her hands trembling as she clutched at her head. The visions, the voice, they had felt so real. Mark appeared moments later, alarmed by her panicked cries. He knelt beside her, his concern outweighing his frustration. What happened? He asked, his hands steadying her. I saw him, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. My grandfather. He was trying to tell me something. Mark's expression hardened. Sarah, this is exactly why I didn't want you coming here. This place, it's dangerous. You're losing yourself. But Sarah shook her head, her resolve solidifying like iron. No, he was warning me, but also guiding me. He knows where the 13th door is. I just have to keep looking. Mark clenched his jaw, but he didn't argue. He could see the determination burning in her eyes, a fire that wouldn't be extinguished. Then I'm staying with you, he said firmly. Whatever you think you need to find, we'll do it together. That night, Sarah sat at the desk again, the journal open before her. As she read her grandfather's fragmented entries, a phrase caught her eye, repeated over and over in desperate scrawls. It cannot be undone. The 13th door must remain sealed, yet the whispers persisted, growing stronger, guiding her toward the hidden truth. And Sarah, despite the warnings, couldn't stop herself from wanting to open the door. The night Sarah discovered the hidden door was marked by an oppressive silence, as if the house itself had been holding its breath in anticipation. She had wandered the hallways aimlessly, her fingers brushing the walls, when she felt it, a faint indentation in the wood. Her breath caught as her hands pressed against the surface, revealing a hidden seam in the paneling. Mark, she called, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. He came running, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. When he saw her standing before the concealed door, his face fell, the color draining from his cheeks. No, he said firmly, shaking his head. Sarah, you're not opening that. I have to, she said, her voice trembling with conviction. This is it, Mark. The answers are in here. Mark stepped between her and the door, his hands gripping her shoulders tightly. Think about what you're saying. Everything in this house, everything about this place. It's warning you to stay away. You saw the ghosts, Sarah. You felt them. Whatever's behind that door is worse. Sarah's heart pounded as she stared into his desperate eyes. She knew he was right. The door radiated an unholy energy, its presence both terrifying and magnetic. But the pull was too strong to resist. I need to know, Mark, she whispered. I need to understand. Mark hesitated, his jaw clenching as he fought an internal battle. Finally, he stepped aside, his shoulders slumping in resignation. If you're doing this, we're doing it together. Sarah nodded, grateful for his unwavering support. With trembling hands, she reached for the door's handle. The brass was ice-cold beneath her fingers. When she turned it, a rush of frigid air burst forth, extinguishing Mark's flashlight and plunging them into darkness. The door creaked open, revealing a room bathed in a faint, unnatural glow. Sarah stepped inside, her breath fogging in the bitter cold. The room was unlike anything she had imagined. It was a twisted archive of her grandfather's darkest memories, brought to life in grotesque detail. Shadows writhed along the walls, forming scenes of anguish and violence. Figures screamed silently in the corners, their faces twisted in eternal torment. Mark hesitated in the doorway, the oppressive atmosphere pushing him back like a physical force. "Sarah, don't go any further," he pleaded. But Sarah was already moving forward, drawn to a pedestal at the center of the room. On it rested a single ornate journal, its leather binding cracked with age. Her grandfather's handwriting adorned the cover. For Sarah. The truth, as she reached for it, the shadows in the room surged, coalescing into monstrous forms. The first ghost appeared, a gaunt, skeletal figure with hollow eyes and claw-like hands. It lunged at Mark, slamming the door shut behind him. "Sarah!" Mark shouted, pounding on the door. "It won't open. Get out of there." But Sarah was frozen, her gaze locked on the journal. She opened it, the pages filled with fragmented entries recounting her grandfather's unspeakable deeds. Betrayals, sacrifices, and a pact with something beyond human comprehension. Each word sent a chill deeper into her soul. The ghosts grew more aggressive, their forms shifting into grotesque parodies of humanity. They surrounded her, their voices echoing in her mind. "You are his blood. You are his sin. You cannot escape this. Join us." The room warped, the walls closing in as Sarah's mind buckled under the weight of the visions. She saw her grandfather, standing in the very spot where she now stood, begging for forgiveness as a dark, shadowy entity loomed over him. "Grandfather," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "What did you do?" The shadows parted, revealing the entity, a towering figure with elongated limbs and a featureless face. Its voice was a deep, guttural rumble that reverberated in her chest. "He opened the door, and so shall you. The bloodline demands it." Sarah clutched her head, her mind fracturing under the onslaught of horrors. Images of her family's past flooded her consciousness. Generations of pain, betrayal, and death, all tied to this cursed room. Mark's voice broke through the chaos, muffled but insistent. "Sarah, fight it. Don't let them win." Summoning every ounce of strength, Sarah faced the ghosts, her voice trembling but defiant. "I won't let you take me," she said, her fingers gripping the journal tightly. "You tormented my grandfather, but you won't have me." The entity laughed, a sound that seemed to come from every corner of the room. "You cannot defy what you are. The 13th door binds you." But Sarah saw a glimmer of hope in the journal's final pages. A ritual, hastily scrawled, that promised to sever the family's connection to the curse. It required a sacrifice, a choice between embracing the darkness or burning it away forever. Mark's voice grew louder, his pounding on the door more frantic. "Sarah, we're out of time." Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped forward, her resolve hardening. She tore the final pages from the journal and began reciting the incantation. The shadows writhed violently, their shrieks filling the air as they tried to stop her. As she finished the ritual, the room erupted in a blinding light. The ghosts screamed in agony, their forms dissolving into the ether. The entity let out a final, bone-chilling roar before vanishing into the void. The door behind her flew open, and Mark rushed in, pulling her into his arms. "Sarah, are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. She nodded weakly, her body trembling. The room was empty now, its horrors banished. But the price had been steep. Her family's dark legacy was burned into her soul, and she knew she would never be the same. As they left the house, Sarah glanced back at the now sealed 13th door, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had uncovered. The past was buried, but its scars would remain forever. The house seemed to shift around Sarah as she stood in the cold, empty space where the 13th door had led. The oppressive weight of the ghost's anguish lingered, but their forms were no longer solid. They flickered like candle flames in the dark, their faces a tapestry of pain and loss. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, pleading, accusing, and yearning for release. Mark, battered but alive, was slumped against the far wall. His breathing was labored, but his eyes followed her every move. "Sarah," he rasped, his voice tinged with desperation. "You don't have to do this alone." She turned to him, her heart aching with guilt and gratitude. "I'm the only one who can," she said softly. This isn't just about my grandfather. It's about me, my family, all of it. The shadows coalesced, forming a towering figure at the room's center. It was not the entity from before, but something altogether more human. Her grandfather's spectral form emerged, his eyes hollow, his expression a mixture of sorrow and regret. Behind him, the other ghosts loomed, their faces etched with the pain of betrayal and the echoes of forgotten suffering. "Sarah," her grandfather said, his voice fractured like the crackle of old wood. "You should not have come here." "I had to," she replied, stepping toward him. "You left me no choice. The secrets, the lies, I needed to know." He reached out a trembling hand, but it wavered, insubstantial. "What I did, what I became, it was to protect us. But I failed. The cost was too great." The room trembled as the ghosts surged forward, their whispers rising in a cacophony of blame and anguish. Sarah held her ground, tears streaming down her face. "I know you tried to protect us," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of her grief. "But you didn't have to do it alone. You let the darkness consume you, and now it's consuming me." Her grandfather's form flickered, his face crumbling under the weight of his guilt. "I was weak. I thought I could contain it, but it grew, and I couldn't stop it." "No," Sarah said firmly, her voice rising. "You made mistakes, but you weren't weak. You were afraid, and so am I." She glanced at the other ghosts, their faces frozen in torment. "You all suffered because of this curse, because of the choices you made and the choices you didn't. But it doesn't have to end this way." The ghosts halted, their flickering forms hesitating. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a surge of clarity. "I forgive you," she said, her voice breaking. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. And so do you." Her grandfather fell to his knees, his form growing brighter, more defined. The other ghosts began to shimmer, their twisted features softening into expressions of relief. The oppressive energy in the room started to lift, replaced by a sense of warmth that spread through Sarah's chest. The towering shadows receded as the ghosts began to fade. Her grandfather looked up at her one last time, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Sarah," he said, his voice clear and steady, "for freeing us, for freeing me." And then he was gone. The room was silent now, the cold replaced by a comforting stillness. Sarah turned to Mark, who had risen to his feet, his face a mixture of relief and awe. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with quiet wonder. "You actually did it." Sarah walked to him, her legs shaky but her heart lighter than it had been in years. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, wrapping her arms around him. Mark held her tightly, his breath warm against her hair. "I didn't understand before," he admitted, "but I do now. You needed to face this, and I'm proud of you." They stood together in the center of the room, surrounded by the remnants of her family's pain, now dissolved into peace. The 13th door, once a harbinger of terror, was now a portal to closure. As they exited the house, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, bathing the decaying Victorian facade in soft light. The house no longer felt oppressive. It felt empty, quiet, at rest. Sarah turned back one last time, her hand in Mark's. "It's over," she said, more to herself than to him. "Whatever haunted this place, it's finally over." Mark squeezed her hand, his smile faint but genuine. "And you're free." Sarah nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. The memories of what she had faced would stay with her, but they no longer felt like chains. They were a part of her story, a reminder of her strength, her resilience, and her ability to forgive. As they walked away, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The house and its ghosts were behind her now, but the lessons they had taught her, the courage to face her past, the power of forgiveness, and the strength to move forward, would remain. The 13th door was closed, but Sarah's life was finally open. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you liked our video. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like our video, and share your thoughts with us in the comments.